Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all those joining today this Stats Café survey design. Are we asking what we think we're asking? My name is Petra Nachmias, and I am standing in today for our director, Rachel Bevan, who is unfortunately not able to be here. So despite all the recent interest in alternative data sources and big data, household surveys are still very much the backbone of official statistics in many different areas, including being a key data source for measuring the Sustainable Development Goals. However, surveys have their own challenges, and having insights into how respondents understand the concepts presented and how statistical standards can be operationalized is key to the production of high-quality data. Our development partner, the ILO, has extensive experience in conducting household surveys, and today we will see some of their exciting work in qualitative testing to improve their generic labour force survey instrument, as well as different projects in this area in a variety of countries. I'm very much looking forward to the rich presentations and discussions. And since time is short, with no further ado, I will hand over to the moderator of this event, Ms. Afsana Yazdani.
Thank you very much, Petra, for opening remarks. Hi, everyone. I'm Afsane, and it's my pleasure to moderate this meeting. Before starting, let me do a quick review of housekeeping rules. Please make sure your microphone and camera are off when you are not speaking. If you forget to mute your microphone, my colleagues will do so to reduce the background noise. This meeting will be recorded, and the video will be made available on the Stats Café webpage. Please post all your questions and comments in the chat box. We will come back to them during the discussion. Okay, we have a line of excellent speakers today. Let me share my screen. All right, you can now see their names and their titles. We have Miss Jessica and Miss Samantha Watson, both ILO labor statisticians at ILO headquarters in Geneva. Mr. Richard Soakiaranga, Senior Research Fellow and Advisor for Policy Research and Strategy Partnership at the Center for Basic Research, Uganda. Ms. Anitha, Professor at Center for Women's Development Studies in India. And Mr. Peter Buwambo, Specialist Labor Statistician at ILO Decent Work Team for South Asia. Please note that 2 of our presentations are pre-recorded. Colleagues from Peru's National Statistics Office could not make it because of the huge time difference, and Richard from Uganda is unable to join due to some unexpected matter. His colleague Emmanuel will be present at the meeting to respond to relevant questions. Without further ado, let me give the floor to our first speaker, Ms. Jessica Gardner. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Afsane. Greetings, everyone, from ILO headquarters in Geneva. I'd like to thank ESCAP for this opportunity to be with you today, and I'm very glad to get the session underway with a brief overview of the type of qualitative research work we do at the ILO Department of Statistics. To begin, I'd like to clarify what I mean by qualitative work in this regard. I'm going to assume this audience knows a lot about quantitative work through surveys and censuses and counting things through fixed number of questions and response options to a relatively large number of cases. By comparison, qualitative research work is more text-based, and the information is gathered through open questions and unstructured or semi-structured interviews, discussions, and other methods like observation. And it's done with a relatively few cases. So it's quite a different approach to quantitative research. And today we're going to be talking about some of the qualitative work that the ILO Department of Statistics does to improve survey design and questionnaire design. Specifically, cognitive interviewing, we'll start with a look at that method, which is a way of finding out what people are thinking when they're answering survey questions. So we ask a number of survey questions and then have a semi-structured conversation with the participant to really get at their thought processes. What did they understand by the question wording? What did they think of as they were preparing their response, and why? And that provides a lot of valuable insight into whether the question works as we intended it to work. And we'll also hear about other qualitative research methods being done through another project. So why is this important to the ILO's work? Well, one of the things that we do is support countries to measure work through labour force surveys and other household surveys. And this is a key collection nationally and a primary source of official statistics on work and the labour force. And data quality is obviously the focus here, and there's been a lot of improvements in data quality, but of course the system needs to respond to new data needs. So we're always revisiting the generic survey and looking at what changes need to be improved, changes need to be made, new topics added, etc. And testing is one way of being able to do this. The two projects that we're talking about today have a strong gender focus. Both are responding to gender data gaps, and that's an important part of all of the work we do at the ILO Department of Statistics across the full statistical cycle, from establishing standards through the International Conference of Labour Statisticians and integrating gender into those, the testing work that supports the development of those standards and their implementation, and the development of tools and guidance that we provide to countries to support consistent measurement, best practices, and developing a sustainable labour force survey program. And we also provide technical assistance and capacity building. The testing work that we're presenting today was done late last year, and it builds on the ILO's kind of long experience in this space of doing both qualitative and quantitative testing around survey development. And there's a series of publications available on our early experiences in this area, mainly the 10 countries where testing was conducted around the 19th ICLS implementation of those standards, and also more recently a test alongside the World Bank's survey in Sri Lanka. So those publications, there'll be a link in the chat, and you can look into the detail if you want to know more of what is behind this testing approach. I want to briefly mention that the project that Richard is about to present on is part of the Engendering Informality Statistics project, which is supporting the current ongoing review of the informality statistics standards, which will be discussed and adopted at the next ICLS next year. And a major part of that project, which is supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is to conduct these tests in 2 countries, in Uganda and in Peru, and we'll hear from both of them today. So especially doing this kind of work, local partnerships are essential, of course, and especially so during the pandemic when it isn't possible for us to go into countries. So we partnered with some excellent organisations to undertake this work. You'll hear from Richard from the Centre for Basic Research in a moment, And in Peru, we worked with the National Statistical Office, INE, and also a research organisation supported us in that work, GRADE. So I'm very glad now to pass the floor back to Afsane so we can hear the presentation from Richard, and I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Panita, could you please? Yeah, thank you so much.
Hello, good morning, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak about the cognitive interview process that we did here in Uganda. The process was undertaken by the Center for Basic Research, where I'm a senior research fellow, and my name is Richard Sewakirianga, and we had also quite a bit of support from the ILO that really worked with us on this process. So I'm just going to share a few thoughts in terms of what we learned through this process, what we really appreciated in terms of what was possible, and I'll do that using a few slides which I'm going to put up right now. First is to say that when you look at the cognitive interviewing, I think it's an interesting process, but there are many things to learn in terms of how one can do it well. Let me just therefore just point out a few things that would be helpful. Our process here in Uganda was not a very large undertaking. We had only about, we had 6 researchers and 2 supervisors, 3 men and 3 women. All of them had experience in both qualitative and quantitative data collection and analysis. And us as supervisors, we had a long history of working with the Uganda Bureau of Statistics on combined methodologies, where we do some of the qualitative work that accompanies the surveys, the national surveys here, as well as myself having worked for nearly a decade on poverty assessments in the Ministry of Finance. All researchers were cognizant of the language in the local areas where we did the research, so all of them could speak Luganda, which was the language in the place. In terms of the tools and the harmonization of the tools, we got a draft tool that was shared with us by the ILO, and we had to subject this to a bit of customization. Not a lot, but there were things that we had to clarify if we were going to do a good cognitive interview. One of them, examples are things like making sure that when you translate an English concept like client and customer, or you are able to say that very well, because in Uganda a word like customer is used both for a supplier as well as a customer who buys, and those are things like that that we needed to sort of work through conceptually. And also other concepts like dependent contractors. I think, technically they shouldn't have any employees, but here we are finding many that had employees, or things like salaries and wages and a few more. But basically what I'm saying is we had to look at the tool and try and work out what are the most appropriate local equivalents in terms of the focus of the tool. So we undertook the surveys in 2 rounds. One of the rounds we did them in both of the districts. We did 1 round. In Wakiso we did 1 round, and in Mukono we did 1 round. During the sampling, we worked very closely with the district planning units to try and find places that would not create so much hurdles in terms of access, but also with the local NGO, which we partner with on other things, to help us with the mobilization and making sure that our respondents knew that we were going to be there. So in a total, we sampled 80 respondents, with a slightly higher number of women than men. And the interviews were face-to-face, but again, they were done when we had a partial lockdown. So we had to follow quite strict protocols, wearing masks, keeping distances and all that, to make sure that, and always making sure that we, as much as possible, didn't create any conditions that would make our enumerators vulnerable. In terms of the fieldwork itself, this was interesting. There are a number of insights that one can get out of the fieldwork, but one of them is that in the cognitive interviews, what we found is that for researchers, they have to really understand that here they are not collecting data. They are not collecting data, which is what we are used to, where you go to the field, you ask a question, you get an answer, and that answer is the most important thing. But here, the most important thing that you want to get out of the respondent is their understanding of the question. So you know, that kind of nuance was something that we had to do a lot about with our researchers. In fact, for some of the first interviews, we had to repeat them because you know, sometimes researchers would go and talk and then they would get you know, answers to these questions. And yet what we are looking for is how have the respondents understood. So that is an important nuance in cognitive interviewing that we thought you know, was a very interesting but also enriching, it's challenging but also enriching exercise. The process also requires a bit of patience on the side of the respondents, because you know, sometimes when you ask somebody, okay, when I asked you this, what did I mean, or that kind of thing, some of them were feeling, you know, why are you being so repetitive? And that's something we had to explain. And in the context of informality, one of the challenges that we are faced with was that in place some of these informal, you know, businesses, the distinction between the private and public is not there. Or some of them would actually negotiate and say, look, we shall do this interview, I'll give you the hour, but when my customers come, allow me to be able to attend to them. That creates a bit of a prolonged process, but that's one of the things that we had to go through. In terms of the data collection, the interview, it's important. What we found that it was really important that the interviews are written up as quickly as possible. Again, because of this whole way approach of collecting understanding rather than answers, we found that these are things one needed to write when they are fresh in the memory. So that is something that we did. Now, we found also that voice recording was really handy and useful, but there were some places where it wasn't accepted, and that of course gave us some challenges. But where it was, the voice recordings were helpful to really enrich the field notes, and that was helpful. But again, as I said, we were not as successful in terms of getting many people to do that. So what lessons did we learn from this process? One of the big lessons was that the training of researchers has to really be comprehensive, and the practice of the tools before the fieldwork is very, very important to really make sure that people know what they are doing and do it very well. Now, while this is true for all the others, but as I said, you know, I can't emphasize it more, that when you are looking at, you know, cognitive capabilities, then that becomes even much more important. Working with researchers who have both qualitative and quantitative skill sets, I think, was also a very good thing, because it was helpful for us to actually be able to share those skills and for people to be able to use those skills in the field. The focus of the whole process has to be on quality and not quantity. And that's something we learned, that the number of questionnaires is not the most important. In fact, in our case, we would only allow the researchers to do 2 interviews a day, and they spend and dedicate the rest of the time writing up the interview notes. But cognitive interviews, I think, allow for a deeper and richer understanding of questions from the different perspectives, and it really, I think, improves the survey questions that end up in the mainstream questionnaires. And I think the last thing for us was that it also helps to remove the ambiguity in many of the questions. Having been part of many surveys, there are always these ambiguities, and I think this is a process that is really very helpful in dealing with ambiguities. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me, and that was the presentation from what we learned here in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard and Emmanuel, for sharing with us the experience of Uganda with conducting cognitive interviews. Now let me share the slides, and I now invite Samantha to take the floor, and yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. I just need to navigate forward quite a bit. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much, everyone. My name is Samantha Watson. I'm a statistician at the ILO and the ILO Department of Statistics. I'm going to be kind of co-presenting with my colleague at the Centre for Women's Development Studies in New Delhi, Nita. I will be providing some background to the project and the rationale for the rapid ethnography, and then Nita will be taking you through some of the results of that work. So just a little bit of background to this particular project in which the rapid ethnography has been embedded. This is a project which is designed to develop and appraise the performance of a series of time use measurement modules for integration into national labour force surveys. And that's a valuable and important thing to do for a number of reasons. I don't really have time to get into it, but we can provide some resources in the chat, and I'm very happy to follow up. Just in terms of the broad objectives of the project, the first goal is really to support the production of statistics on unpaid care and domestic work, as well as total work time. And we're not seeking to provide a substitute for independent time use surveys. The goal is really just to provide an alternative that can be used to produce interim statistics between time use surveys which are conducted on a 5 or 10 year schedule, as well as to provide an option for where a full time use survey, which is extremely resource intensive, isn't a feasible option. One benefit, though, of embedding time use measurement within a labour force survey is that it really can advance analysis of the relationships and trade-offs between paid and unpaid forms of work. So obviously, as the ILO, that's something we're always very interested in doing. So the focus of this pilot project is really to test and to stress test the different modules that we have available to us. So we've designed 2 alternative modules. One is stylized, which is a list of questions in the normal sort of questionnaire format. And the other is a light diary, which is a way of gathering what people did during the day, usually over 24 hours, 1 or more 24-hour periods, sometimes over a week. And you take the person through it sort of minute by minute from the time, a particular time, until 24-hour period later, for example. And that's quite an intensive data collection method. So we want to be very confident in those modules before we provide them as options for inclusion in a labour force survey. And the pilot strategy is really beginning from much more intensive qualitative approaches running through to randomized survey experiments. And then in each phase, we're also going to be focusing on different questions and assessing different elements of the performance. And then the outcomes of this project will be generic modules for time use measurements suitable for integration into labour force surveys, together with implementation toolkits and a training course curriculum. So just in terms of the different methods, I'm not going to get into all of them. I just wanted people to see how the REA is embedded in a wider strategy of piloting. So during the REA, we're focused on providing evidence that can inform the development of the light diary and the stylized module. We're particularly focused on sources of reporting gaps, the meaning and the salience of passive care responsibilities, which is something that we know is very prone to under-identification, as well as anchoring clock time-based reporting. So among some populations, it can be quite difficult to anchor activities within the hours and minutes of the day. And a lot of the goal is just really assessing our recall or aid development. And so after this, which has been completed now, we'll be moving to cognitive interviews and then to randomized survey experiments. And then expert review, you can see at the end, but that's really embedded throughout. So just a very quick word on rapid ethnography, but I'm going to be extremely brief. So in general, REA, it's a short-term rapid research approach, and it's grounded in ethnographic principles. And when it comes into its own, really, is when we want to elicit rich descriptions of understandings, beliefs, motivations and relationships, processes, systems, within the context in which they unfold. And so in common with traditional ethnography, the goal is really to learn from rather than study people. But in a departure from traditional ethnography, REA is replacing the lengthy immersion that so typifies that approach with a much shorter timeline and a much narrower focus. And it also tends to adopt a multi-sited and multi-member team approach, so in place of the lone anthropologist. And what I will say as well is that the involvement of highly skilled researchers, trained and experienced in qualitative research methods and really fluent in the nuances of the study site's languages and culture are really fundamental. They're the keystone of successful REA, and Anita will be able to speak more to that. So in terms of the REA for this pilot, we adopted a case-based approach with purposive sampling of households, and we prioritise the inclusion of different intra and inter-household care work configurations, because that's really at the heart of the modules that we're testing. And so our methods included, and this is very typical of rapid ethnography, direct observation, semi-structured interviews, informant shadowing, plus the time use recall module that we had, as well as key informant interviews and focus groups. And our objective was really to just gather data on the diversity of perceptions and meanings attached to time and time use as they are configured in our modules. So again, keeping that tight focus on the objectives of the work in a departure from traditional anthropology, where it's a much wider focus. And so in terms of key aims, we wanted to identify when gaps arise between actual and reported time use, in order to inform our modules and training strategies for how to bridge those gaps. And also strategies around recording time, so duration of different activities, sequencing of different activities, and to guide the framing of the questionnaire items, particularly around different forms of care work, and especially those that are done simultaneously with another activity, which are very prone to under-identification. So this work was conducted last year. We actually had a window just before Omicron disrupted fieldwork again, but the work was completed. And I will pass to Nita to take you through some of the findings. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I'll start from where Samantha has left. As it's already been said that we had followed an REA method, which basically involved, in collecting data from 3 sites in one state in India, Haryana. We took 3 geographical sites, defining it in terms of development. One was a remote rural area, one was rural, and one was semi-urban. In all these locations, agriculture was the main occupation. Even in semi-urban area, the population was dependent on agriculture to a larger extent, though they were also into other non-agriculture work. We selected 39 respondents from 21 households from these 3 sites, and the selection was purposive. We gave some weight to the main occupation of the household, the age of the selected respondent. We kind of ensured that we have a good number of respondents who had this responsibility of childcare, so that we can capture care and its passive kind of nature. We used trained investigators. The training actually went on for some time and started before, in fact, the actual beginning of the field work. The investigators were trained and they were all from the local area. In fact, we ensured that at least one person should belong to the area that we have selected, so that that entry and our acceptance remained, not a question. It is actually then became easy. We, in fact, followed what is called the time use recall method. We had, before we started the interviews and the field work, we actually had spent some days in the field where we actually observed and had, kind of a broad overview of the field, which helped, in fact, in terms of our entry and our, further work. So in terms of our field tools, we actually had started with some kind of a semi-structured interview, and then which basically followed a time use recall method, which was followed by a shadowing and observation of the participants that we selected. And we, after that, after doing the shadowing, each of the respondents were again, interviewed on what they have missed or what they have underreported and overestimated, so that we know the reasons and the context in which some of these issues gets overreported or underreported or missed out. This is basically, and I'm going to share some of the findings that we had based on this field work. We found that it's difficult for, in many cases, for the respondents to, kind of differentiate between productive work and what is called housework or domestic work or care work. There was a lot of intersection that were found between these, because many of this was overlapping. For example, preparation of cow dung, which was, because this is also, a pocket where there's a lot of dairying that's happening. There's a lot of work that goes into each of these operations, and it doesn't actually then can be divided into, whether it is economic work or whether it is outside economic work. And there is also seasonality to many of the work that they are doing. So the intensity, the schedule, and the timing of a lot of work was dependent on some of these seasonalities, which included both economic work-related seasonalities and also other housework-oriented seasonalities. For example, heating water. The survey was done during November, December, which was actually the winter season, the winter season in North India. So there was a lot of time that women spent on heating water for bathing, and this is something which will not be there in summer. So there is a seasonality, and also the fact that women reported that collection of fuel wood, and all this is also again seasonal. So there's a lot of housework was also found to be seasonal. And also the intensity and timing dependent was also, we found that it was depending on the household, nature of the household, whether the household is predominantly an agriculture household, or whether they were wage work kind of households. So the day started accordingly, and it is not that every day is the same. If many days, what we found was that the day could be completely different in terms of the timing and intensity, which was overall there was some standardization that would bring in, but that there was also some differences between days. In the morning, what we found is that there has been multiple activities that women were doing, men and women were actually indoor, especially women. For example, we, when this was also while shadowing, one observed that women will put tea and water for heating for bathing, and then they will start the preparatory work for breakfast. Alongside, they could do sweeping and mopping or cattle work. So there's a lot of overlapping that you find in the morning, and which actually then becomes very difficult for anyone in terms of identifying what is a main work and the kind of labor intensity and time that's allocated to each of these activities. So, the overall analysis in terms of our interviews and our observation, what we have found is that there is an overestimation of cleaning work, cattle work, water collection, which is in fact, most of it is demanding physical work. Though cooking is very labor intensive and it is in fact consuming much more time compared to other activities, it did not dominate in the narrative of their work or their daily routines. Even within, if you look at the cooking and some of the aspects of cooking, there has been underreporting of cleaning of kitchen. Though cleaning was overreported, cleaning of kitchen was underreported, and also women were making small meals in between, which was not even highlighted in the discussions. The fact that in this region the people eat what is called the local rotis, local bread, which is rotis, then that is also served to different people in different rounds. It's all served hot. So, there is also, serving is also, kind of differentiated and it is segregated. So every time women were found making rotis, depending on who's going to eat. So, that went almost, during lunchtime or dinner time, and that occupied a lot of time. So a question that was coming up in our observation and in terms of our interaction was that, is serving part of cooking? Because many women, kind of classified it as part of cooking. Some didn't even mention about serving at all. But then serving, whether that could be part of cooking or another care work, which is, which is beyond this physical preparation. So let me come to the most critical question that we wanted actually our survey to illuminate us in terms of care work. We did kind of mainstream into our whole approach to the qualitative interviews, care as an important component. What we have found is that it's actually very difficult to capture even then. Women were spending a lot of time in terms of care work, because we had many households who have had small children, and this, even then, they have they were actually doing most of this was undertaken alongside other work. So there was a huge underreporting that we found in terms of care work. What got reported was about feeding time or exclusive attention that was given to children. That was at least somewhat better reported. But many aspects of childcare was diffused in terms of women's daily routine. I just kind of gave you some glimpse from what we have got from the field. In fact, one respondent, she was found making banana shake while her daughter was on her back. Here, while the main task is about making banana shake, she is also attending to her daughter. Similarly, she she went upstairs to get utensils, and then she carries her daughter along. And though her main aim is to fetch utensils, she's doing childcare along with that. And again, she's kind of now putting it into the utensils and serving. Again, the child is around and she's taking care of the child. So, and this was not even reported or not even thought as kind of care work at all. Another care work dimension that got reported was in terms of serving the elderly. So there were in many of these households, joint families or extended nuclear family was the norm. So there were seniors in the house, with mother-in-law, father-in-law, or others. And in that case, the women were constantly to serve the elderly in terms of meals, tea, water, and that was happening at regular intervals, and in some cases even medical care. So this was also not kind of reported. Rather, they would like to put it as seva, which is like service for the house. So they didn't want to actually take it as, even when we talked to them, they didn't want to even consider it as work. Putting water in the bathroom, which is again, as I said, it was winter and constant boiling and then putting it in the bathroom, giving towels to elderly and the children. This was also never reported in the sharing. Many women made a distinction between main task and background work. Some of these background work included serving food, making beds, childcare. But some of these background works, in many instances, we have found was missed out completely in terms of their reporting, while some did, report about it. Like folding quilts or making beds and things like that was, kind of not, as I said, like many other care-related activities. This was also not even a care, but it was physical work. But many ruled out this as being classified as something that requires their time. In fact, this was the response that we got. Have you gone crazy? Is this work? Who even remembers these tasks, and who needs to know about all these tasks? So there's a trivializing of what they have been doing and what they are doing in terms of some of these statements that they make. If you look at the generation that we kind of looked at, in some households we looked at elder men, elder women, and mother-in-law and father and the wife. In some houses we looked at women like wife and sister-in-law or daughter. So if you look at the composition of the household, what we have found in general was that the younger women tend to report some more activities compared to elder women. In fact, many elder women, even cattle work was kind of outside their definition of any kind of work that requires their time. So, in fact, we got many responses from the field where one was told that these are done in my leisure, according to my wish, and it's part of my leisure. I enjoy doing it, and all those kinds of responses. Finally, I will end by saying that the understanding of free time that many of these women had was was something which is very, very I think very important for us to understand, because morning many women reported that it was quite hectic and there were multiple tasks, although there was under-reporting of many tasks, but still they reported one after another in terms of a sequence. But when it comes to some activities which are undertaken in the afternoon, which they called as leisure time, and only when in shadowing that one observed that the leisure time was actually used for either stitching, ironing, and also alongside attending to children. So the whole understanding of leisure as something which is so integrated or so much into the kind of work that women do is a learning that I think one has to take forward in terms of our own understanding of some of these concepts. To end, it seems very difficult to put it in terms of duration, even when women were talking about the previous day, except some activities which were tied to external factors, whether it is non-farm work or schooling. So apart from the enumeration classification issues, I think what has come up through this surveys is that there is a social and cultural context within which work and leisure is being defined. And there's a relationship that underlines these, and these are to be taken into account in terms of our survey methods. Thank you. Over to the organizers.
Yes, thank you so much, Nita. Thanks, Samantha and Nita, for sharing with us how ethnographic assessment can help identifying the issues in measuring the unpaid care and domestic work, which will hopefully ultimately help closing the gender gaps. So now we should have the pre-recorded presentation by our colleagues from Peru. I can see that a conversation in the chat box is ongoing. I invite everyone, if you have any comments or questions, please put it in the chat. After the presentation by Peru, we will start the discussion. Vanita, could you please?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Luis Calle Rosasco, and I am part of the technical cooperation staff of the National Statistical Office of Peru. On this occasion, I would like to speak on behalf of the team of the National Directorate of Censuses on service of my NSO to tell you briefly about the Peruvian experience in the application of cognitive tests. The Peruvian experience in the cognitive test process, learned lessons. Peru began its experience in cognitive tests in 2015, when it was one of the 10 selected countries by ILO to participate in the Experimental Studies Program for adaptation of the new recommendations on labor statistics. Training was received on methodology and usefulness of cognitive tests. Also, 2 questionnaire models of the labor force survey were evaluated. Between 2016 and 2017, Peru was part of the 5 selected countries for the Regional Public Goods Project, having flagged socially as executing unit. With the valuable support of ILO, we applied cognitive tests to define the module for identification and measurement of volunteer work. Since 2021, Peru participates in gender and informality statistics, another project conducted by ILO, and 2 cognitive tests were carried out regarding informality. In the second round, 2 questionnaire options were tested. With the learned experience in cognitive tests, our NSO started to implementing them in different household surveys, and also the ethnicity question included in the national population census. This allows us to improve question wording and make the necessary changes in our questionnaires in order to achieve our proposed goals. After this, I would like to speak about briefly regarding our NSO learned lessons on the cognitive test process in all stages. At the training stage, at least 2 additional days are necessary to be included to carry out training practices through simulated and real interviews, so the staff become familiar with documents to be used in fieldwork, evaluated questionnaire, cognitive protocol, templates, etc. This process is addressed to know by anticipate if any question is problematic during the interview and documents adjusting before using them in fieldwork. At sample selection stage, including gender and educational level as criteria for selecting the participants' quota will ensure a balance in the distribution of respondents' characteristics. It also helps to determine the level of understanding of the selected population. Likewise, it's advisable not exceeding a maximum sample of 40 interviewees to get a good analysis of questions functionality. A larger amount makes analysis more difficult. Questionnaires and templates. Cognitive tests must be set for each question evaluated and not left to interviewees' discretion to decide which one to apply. This eventually implies that the interviewer gets tired or important tests are omitted from the analysis. A good practice that we adopt is to include the question and the cognitive test in the registration templates to simplify the work of the note-taker. In the respondent characteristics section of the summary of the analysis template, it's helpful to have the respondent's occupation and industry. It's really important that some cognitive tests with kind of questions such as, did you find this question easy or difficult? How do you feel answering this question? And others must be placed at the beginning of each question. This is useful to prevent interviews answering due to ease or difficulty of the cognitive probing question than the tested question itself. The interviewer must pay attention on it when it happens to remind the respondent that the question is being tested. In the cognitive protocol, all tests for a specific evaluated question must be designed on a single page. It was not in directed practices that some tests weren't applied because they were on different pages. During the interviews stage, the recording of interviews should be mandatory. It's a complementary resource for documentation and is very useful for summaries and the subsequent analysis. Interviews instructions should emphasize the importance of selecting people with good morale, availability of time and the willingness to collaborate with the investigation. An interview with different characteristics will hinder the proposed objectives. In the same way, The answers must always be made by the interviewee, even if he or she is accompanied by another person. Cognitive interviews must be carried out in a quiet environment, avoiding crowd vehicles noise or other distracting elements. These situations tend to make the interviewee remain silent or ask redundant questions. During the preparation of results, it's important that at least one member of each team that carry out the fieldwork participate during the results report stage. This will help pinpoint information that has not been clearly noted. Finally, I would like to say thank you to ILO and all participants to give me the opportunity to bring this presentation to all of you. I hope you like it and see you next time. Please, moderator, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks to our colleagues from Peru National Statistics Office and for their presentation, which was brief and yet to the point and very helpful. So, colleagues, let me remind you that the meeting recording, all slides and relevant links will be available on the Stats Café website by the end of today. And now it is time for questions and answers and discussion. I can see that we have got a couple of questions in the chat. And we also received a couple of questions from the participants when they registered. And let me start with the ones that we gathered ahead of the meeting, and then we will start with the one in the chat. So one question that I can see also some colleagues have asked in the chat box is about the selection of participants or informants for qualitative testing. Is it similar to the surveys, or is there any sample design or what? I believe that in the presentations, speakers already mentioned, but let me now ask Samantha if you want to elaborate more on this.
Thank you. Sure, so I can elaborate a little bit. So I think, it was stated at the start, and I think it's been implicit in the different presentations. One of the defining features that distinguishes qualitative and quantitative research is the approach to sampling. So generally, obviously, for quantitative research, we want sample to be representative in a statistical sense of the target population, the population that we'll be inferring results to. That's not the case in qualitative, purely because we're not looking at the same thing. So the way, I know there were some interesting examples in the chat around how we can best distinguish qualitative and quantitative. I like to draw on work by Andrew Sayer, where we think of extensive for quantitative versus intensive for qualitative. So we're looking at a phenomenon in a small, generally a much smaller sample when we're doing qualitative work. We're very interested in understanding the causal mechanisms, the context, all of those things in a kind of non-atomistic way. So I'll give the example of the rapid ethnography work. And what I will also highlight as well is that with qualitative work, there is scope for your sample to your sampling strategy to alter in the course of the research, which obviously we wouldn't want to happen with a survey sample. We began by purposefully sampling areas where we'd work, and that was based on kind of an idea of variability as to what was important. We could compare it with stratification in a survey, but it's not statistical in that way. We took, as Nita clearly explained, 3 very different sites because we wanted to see how our approach would perform in those different areas. An area that was peri-urban, an area that was rural, but that was quite well connected, and then another area that was rural and was a little bit more sort of enclosed, a little bit more difficult to reach. And that was obviously very important for the study of time use. And then within those areas, we adopted a case-based method, which is a very established sampling approach within qualitative research, We selected households, and we selected based on, we wanted to have a good mix of care configurations within the household. So as Nita said, nuclear households with small children, extended families or joint households with multiple generations. That was the goal. And then within those households, we were working with the individuals there. They were our participants. And then we also selected key informants, so Angamwadi workers, locally prominent people working in sort of the care economy, those kinds of things. But I think the key takeaway is that it's purposive and it's very much dictated by your research questions when you go in. So the important thing is to have clarity about the research questions that you have and the types of informants that can provide insights into those questions. And normally as well, we wouldn't set necessarily an upper limit in a very concrete way. We often work until we're not getting any new information or not getting any new findings, and then we would close. So yeah, I hope that's helped clarify.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Nita, Emmanuel, do you want to take floor and add to what Samantha said?
I think Samantha has explained the process very well. Just to add that, you know, it was purposive selection, but one was also guided by the fact that, you know, since it is about getting detailed interviews and also shadowing, which is basically observing a person, observation means that the team has to spend the day with the person concerned and observing as to what that case, that respondent was doing or undertaking, is something which also was a question about access. So we had to actually in the process even change some households because some were not actually very cooperative in terms of they being observed during the day. So we did try and put that purposive sampling even within that kind of a situation. So this is just about adding to what Samantha has already said.
Thanks, Nita. We need patient people to respond. All right, Emmanuel, would you like to come in?
Yes, thanks very much. I saw two questions in the chat that I may wish to respond to. One was about the experience with the respondents of this approach. They appreciate it. Of course, it's the way you engage the respondents and the way you are conversant with the tool, because you see the process and the questions look a little bit repetitive because you're asking, how did you feel when I asked you this question, and you go back and forth. But the way the way you explain to the respondent at the beginning what you want to do is quite very important. Of course, each interview took about 45 to 1 hour, depending on how the respondent is picking the issues that you're asking, because along the way you also need to go on explaining and without guiding the respondent of the issues that you are looking for. Then the other question was about if these two, if this approach can explain the discrepancies between qualitative and quantitative. I wouldn't call them discrepancies because the two processes at times bring out different results, because at times they just complement each other, and at times one comes on to explain the results from the other. So they are not really discrepancies, but they complement each other in one way or the other. Those are the two things that I wanted to explain. The other thing probably that didn't come out in the slides is that close supervision of this process, cognitive interviews, is quite important.
Emmanuel, I think you have muted yourself. We lost your voice. Emmanuel, we cannot hear you. Calix, can you hear him? Because I don't have his voice.
I hear you, Afsana, but I don't hear Emmanuel.
All right, okay. Emmanuel, we cannot hear you. Okay, I see that Emmanuel responded to Karen and Violet. So Karen and Violet, if you have any follow-up question, please raise your hand, or you can also put it in the chat box. One other question that we gathered during the registration is that where such qualitative testing of questionnaires has been implemented, is the public aware of such testing and its value to data quality? If not, how can NSOs improve such knowledge among the data users? So I invite Jessica to reflect on it. I would also like to invite all participants of the meeting. If you have any national experience on using qualitative testing, please feel free to put it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and share with us. Jessica, over to you.
Thanks, Afsana, and thanks for the question. I think this connection of what we're doing to improve data quality and making sure that users and our providers of data are aware of those processes is a really interesting one. I am very interested to hear from colleagues in the Stats Café about national experiences here. I think that it was interesting for us to reflect on how the participants in the exercise viewed it. They're giving up a lot of their time. They need to understand the reasons behind why we're asking them for their time. So, and as Emmanuel was just saying, in the main, participants are quite receptive to the process and want to contribute to better data. But that said, it is a burdensome process. It does require their intense attention during that hour or so that they're working with the research teams. I'll just pick up on another point from one of the questions in the chat around challenges, if I may, just to mention that and link to this respondent burden is to keep, in the cognitive interview process, to keep the number of questions that are being tested between about 10 and 15 questions. It's a very intensive process. I like what Samantha said about those words. It is intensive, and it does require the team to be very well trained in running the interview, but also having a very good note taker there. Our colleagues from INE mentioned the value of audio recording the discussion, but that's not always possible, as we saw in Uganda. It requires consent, and not everyone's going to consent to that. So the notes are key, and really not to underestimate the time needed for analysis. One interview of an hour generates a huge amount of information that needs to be analysed and alongside the other interviews and synthesised into key findings, and that takes a considerable amount of time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And I can see that colleague from New Zealand has said that they are using the qualitative and cognitive testing. So colleagues, if you have any relevant national example, feel free to put it in the chat. I see that some of the questions have already been responded, but I do not see any response to the question by Michael. Michael, would you like to take the floor and ask your question, or you like me to read out your question? All right, let me read the question. This is for you, Nita. that on some of the care work not reported, such as caring for children and elderly, did the team establish the reasons why these were not being reported, or what can be done to best capture them?
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. It was not only care work that was not getting reported, underreported or missing. Many other kinds of housework were also, underreported and missed out in their response. We actually did go back to the respondents in terms of understanding as to why these were not reported or underreported. Some was because of the sheer the sheer intensity through which some of these activities were undertaken, and but most important issue in terms of care was that it was not seen as work or seen as especially with elderly care and some parts of child care, it was not counted as part of the work understanding. So it was they made a distinction between seva, which is service, and what is called as work. So and I think while in our interaction with them, in terms of our interaction with them, some of them did accept some of those what they were doing. Not that everyone did accept all that what we were trying to kind of take it to them, but they did show some kind of understanding that okay, this was forgotten, this was actually something that took my time, all of that it did. But still there is a challenge in terms of getting a good estimation in terms of these categories that we normally use. But I'm sure some, when we are at the use of maybe props and maybe questions that follow, generic questions, further questions could bring in more than what we get right now. So I think that's a suggestion that we would like to kind of take after our experience with the field work. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that Samantha and Emmanuel, you also have your hands raised. Perhaps Samantha, would you like to start, and then we will.
Sure. So I just wanted to come in
Add
after
to Nita.
Yeah,
Right.
so it was everything Nita said is absolutely the case. I just want to say in terms of the actual taking forward the measurement implications from the work, which is so important, and which is really the goal of the rapid part of the ethnography. It's that you do have that much quicker turnaround than you would normally from a more extended ethnographic approach. We already updated the segues into some of the questions to highlight these responsibility issues, and we've developed some modifications to vignettes in order to help guide people, and we've updated the training manuals for the interviewers. It's something that's very recognised in time use research, that one of the major challenges is really getting at these taken for granted elements, particularly that are just viewed as background responsibilities. So things that are so natural that they're, they come without saying, so they go without saying. People don't think they need to mention it, and they often assume that it's just so well known that it really does go without saying. We had some very nice data coming out of the work in Haryana, where people said, oh, but you know, because you do this too, where it would be a woman who was the field researcher. They would say, well, you must also do this. So we do it, it takes time. So there's sort of this gulf that emerges because things are so taken for granted that they're not viewed as really even part of your day. They're the sea in which you swim. You don't question it. So that has been shown, and then our tools have been updated on the basis of it. And so that's really the reason for sequencing the different phases in the way that we have. Those modified tools will now be subject to cognitive interviewing, where we'll see if we've actually made the improvements that we think we have, and we'll have 2 rounds of cognitive interviewing so that we can test subsequent modifications to the modules and the trainings on the basis of the first round. And only then will we move to our randomized survey experiments, where we're testing at scale and we'll have statistical information on to compare. So thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. And Emmanuel, you want to say something? Emmanuel?
Yes, I lost contact.
All right, okay. Now we hear you.
Yeah, my connection went off, but I hope I had answered the questions that were raised in the chat. I was just emphasizing the issue of close supervision and making sure that if things are not going well, it's right, don't get shy to pause and tighten up a few things. Because for us in the second day, we had to pause and get the team together and make sure that we tighten a few things that we are seeing that are not going on well. Which is not the case for major surveys. Of course, at times you have mid-term reviews, but for this one, you have to be on a daily basis, knowing what is coming out.
All right, thank you so much, Emmanuel. So we have got many questions and comments in the chat box, and there are also other questions that I would like to ask, but we are reaching the end of our Stats Cafe. So maybe I can just ask a question, and Jessica, if you can provide a very brief response, or maybe you can just sum up what has been told so far, is about the requirements and costs of the qualitative testing. We have already heard from the colleagues, but if you could just somehow summarize.
Sure, thank you. It is a very difficult question to answer because there's a number of different elements, and of course it does depend very much on how you design these types of tests and where you want to implement them. But to say that we can provide some further information to give you a sense of the size of the teams. I think you saw in the examples from Uganda and Peru, it's about 6 researchers or 10, I think, in Peru that are dividing up the work. They do need to take the time, only having a small number of interviews per day, so you can work out the human resource cost. And of course, then there's the time needed to prepare and for analysis, which is considerable. And then I saw the question on incentives, and that would be a cost if you were going to include that. Transport, those types of elements. But yeah, very happy to provide some more detail to give people that are interested a bit more of a sense of the resources involved in this exercise.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thanks to everyone and all the speakers. I now hand to Peter for wrapping up the meeting and closing. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you so much. Yes, when I was asked to wrap up this session, I quickly took an audit to assess the role quality testing has played in the development of questionnaires in the region. I picked up a few countries, especially where ILO has been involved in the development of new questionnaires, which actually was mentioned earlier: Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and in Vietnam. And I also picked up countries where ESCAP did some work on the improvement of disability measurements. This was done in Cambodia, Maldives, Mongolia, Philippines, and Sri Lanka. And I believe there are some more countries which have done this before. Where do we go from here? I believe it will gain some kind of traction as we go. Some countries will embrace this. I remember my experience. I started appreciating these methods in South Africa. We didn't have much experience about this, and we are not very structured when we are doing it. But even in that state, where we're not structured, it really helped a lot. So I believe countries will embrace this as we go. Then What can we do? Ourselves, we pledge to support any member state which would like to embrace these methods. This could be achieved through active participation, if you are informed early enough, or even sharing materials we have already. And with these few words, I'd like to thank the presenters, ESCAP, to organize this, and also the participants who have been very, very active. I thank you all. Over.
Thank you very
Thank you
much,
so much,
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks also to the presenters who were very excellent. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
That's
Peter.
going to help us. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.